we've had another question that's cropped up, and it's one that was sort of aimed at John, but it's been dealt with by Diane as well, and it's to do with our Ask site. I'll just pull the question up now that we had sent in. Now, this was sent in to you personally, John, yes?
Yes. Well, it was sent to the Q&A section.
It's quite a long question, so it's covering some of us up, but let's just read down through it. John Mackay writes that animals from Australia had maybe 100 years to go to Noah. Yet he doesn't answer how they would get back, nor does he address how they would in the process find food that they were adapted to. A penguin, for example, cannot and could not survive in hot climates. The same would go for animals adapted to hot climates, passing through areas with cold climates. So, John, you've had the question asked. Over to you.
Yes, and those of you who get our electronic newsletter this Wednesday, you'll get the full answer to that in the actual mail out link to our Q&A site, etc. I'll just remind people of a couple of things. They can look up this question themselves and discover one thing. We talked about Australian animals, not animals from Australia. You might think there's not much difference there, but in reality there was no Australia before Noah's flood, and the question makes that very clear. So they didn't come back to Australia because they never left there. Australia and America and all the subcontinents don't exist till after the flood, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, in terms of climate distribution, etc., before the flood, the world was still pretty good. No summer, no winter. So all the selection pressures you're talking about that you're used to, and assuming that the polar bears and the penguins, etc., had to survive in the present and therefore had to be like that in the past. Sorry, you need to get biblical glasses on, and that's what the question actually says. But full details on that Wednesday. And Diane and I will just thrash out one issue here, and that's the penguins. Now, I've traveled pretty widely around the world, and the one thing I've noticed is there are penguins on the equator in the Galapagos Islands. Now, Diane, you've made a few interesting comments in our coming answer. What do you notice about the penguins in the Galapagos? It is on the equator, so it's not cold at all, no ice, no snow. But how do they adapt to nesting?
Well, the Galapagos Islands are volcanic islands, so the vegetation is pretty sparse and there's very little soil there. It's just most of it's a rocky outcrop. So in order to protect their eggs, they just go and find caves and crevices and lay their eggs in those. And because it is hot, it's tropical, they have to protect them from the sun. Now, that's the extreme opposite of the Antarctic penguins, where they lay their eggs basically on their own feet. And they keep them on their feet and they cover them with a fold of skin and feathers, and that keeps them warm. But the basic penguin structure in terms of the anatomy of the bird is the same. The Galapagos penguins are small. The Antarctic ones tend to be larger. And in between the equator and Antarctica, there are a whole lot of other coastlines where you get penguins of varying sizes. They live on the coastlines of Australia. You can come and see them here. They live on the coastlines of South America and of South Africa. And they vary in size and nesting habits depending on what the terrain is like. So in Australia, where there is soil and sand and things like that for them to dig in, they will actually dig burrows and line them like a nest and protect their eggs from predators and from various other hazards. Whereas the Antarctic penguins, basically, they just have to protect their eggs from the cold. So they do by keeping them wrapped around their own body, as it were. So penguins can live in lots of different places, and they do in this world. The interesting thing is they're only found in the southern hemisphere. The Galapagos Islands are right on the equator, so I think they go about 1 degree north or something like that. But basically, penguins live in the southern hemisphere. Polar bears live in the northern hemisphere, so there's been a great divide there. But there's a good reason for that, which we will explain in our answer to the question. Back to you, back to us.
Given my experience, Joe, You can swap to my screen at the moment. Diane mentioned the Australian penguins, and yes, we've seen them in Queensland. We've seen them in New South Wales, South Coast. I've come across them in Port Phillip Bay. There's a penguin colony down there. And what's interesting, in the days before access to many of these places were forbidden, I used to enjoy climbing cliffs, sea cliffs. Now, the one thing you note about these penguins is because they're so well designed for living in the water, even though they have to breed on land, they're never far from a coastline. And if you climb coastal cliffs, then don't be surprised, like myself, if all of a sudden out of an unseen burrow comes a honking, gawking, squawking, whatever word you want to use for it, small penguin, just letting you have it. And I nearly fell off the cliff one day when this penguin suddenly appeared out of nowhere. They certainly do inhabit cliffs above the water, and they certainly do dig burrows in Australia to keep them out of the sun. And they actually line their nests with feathers and soft stuff. In the Galapagos, holes in the ground out of the sun. In Australia, long burrows out of the sun, but more feathery because they're on the coastal regions. And in Antarctica, you see the whole range. And of course, the one thing that most people never notice is a penguin is black on the back and white on the front, like looking like little waiters with bow ties. And no one suggests they evolved blackness to keep themselves, in the sun because of the radiation, and whiteness on the front because they were hiding in the snow. It doesn't make any sense. Their coloration has nothing to do with where they live climate-wise at all. But more of that, as Joe said, coming up. If you don't get our electronic newsletter, I guess, Joe, you can tell them how to do that. And that will be coming up this Wednesday in full from myself and from Diane. Craig, one thing I've never found, I guess you have penguins in Tasmania, do you?
Yeah, we've got them right in the river right here where we live.
All right. Up the river, hey?
Yeah, just here. Yeah. All in the estuary that we're in. Yeah, they're definitely right here. And it gets to over 20 degrees here, so they definitely don't need cold. The water temperature I'm talking about, the water temperature gets to 20 degrees.
People can visit your museum and go penguin watching at the same time, hey?
Well, they literally can if they go to the penguin display across the river, yeah.
And you'll also find, having come out of a zookeeping background, animals are remarkably resilient, particularly birds and mammals, warm-blooded animals, right, of being able to survive in a whole variety of environments and temperatures that they're not actually found in natively, shall we say. So, for instance, if you go onto Google and Google Saudi Arabia zoo penguins, I'm pretty sure there'll be some penguins in a Saudi Arabian zoo, or so on and so forth in the hot areas. So they can survive for pretty well, actually, in a variety of different environment types as well. There up on the screen, you can see the newsletter sign up, so you can use that to be able to go and sign up to the newsletter, and you can get the evidence news as well as the creation news that Creation Research produces. And there's links on there as well to get all the other newsletters from all different creation research officers around the world. All right.